Thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to have Laura with us tonight. Laura studied botany and anthropology at Connecticut College when she was a girl. She's currently, now she's a woman. She is currently a teacher at North Shore Community College in landscape design and a former adjunct professor at the Boston Agricultural College. I'm standing close because I'm using her microphone. Laura Eisner is a landscape design consultant who helps homeowners with landscape design, plant selection, and placement of trees and shrubs, as well as perennials. She's a member of the Saugus Garden Club and offered to write a series of articles about what's blooming in town shortly after the outbreak of COVID-19. She was inspired after seeing so many people walking through the town. Laura has been taking pictures around town and writing a page in the Advocate newspaper ever since. We're so grateful for her. And maybe more importantly, Laura is married to Paul Kenworthy. Ken too.
Yeah, right.
It's our pleasure to introduce Laura Eisner.
Thank you, Donna. You said so many nice things. I don't recognize who you were talking about, but some of it sounds like me. So today we're talking about specialized styles of gardening, which means different designs mostly having to do with perennials. Only a few of them, though, the typical perennial border that most people think of. So we're going to be looking at rock gardens, water gardens, wildflower meadows, butterfly gardens, a little bit at greenhouse gardening and cold frames, which many people have never tried, but in our climate, there's some good reasons for doing it. And it's often, if you look at a particular garden, it could be part of a number of different styles. So an herb garden might also be a wildflower meadow. Or it could be you could title it something else. And some of these I look at and I say in the picture, well, what is this? An all-white garden, a shade garden, both maybe? And so sometimes it's helpful as you're thinking about your garden, to think about a theme for it, because then when you're looking at plants, you can say, well, does this fit into this garden, or does it fit into that other themed garden that I've got over on the other side of the yard? And there's a number of different ways that you can I knew I'd do it wrong starting right out. But there's a number of different ways that you might come up with your ideas from the garden. Sometimes when people are faced with an empty spot in their yard, the idea comes from what's the ground like, what's the sun conditions. And so a shade garden, right, and rocks. So these are mostly not in Saugus, but quite a few of them are New England. I think there's one or two that are in different countries or different parts of the world but that still apply. So partly the reason this is the first slide is just because I like it so much. It is, in fact, a traditional perennial border. If you climbed over the fence and looked from the other way, a perennial border is an edging either to a lawn, which is how a lot of our gardens look, or to a paved space like the edge of a driveway or the walkway, and often viewed from just a few angles. So you can easily follow the directions that you'll read in so many books about short plants in the front and tall ones in the back and medium ones in the middle. But there are lots of gardens that are viewed from different angles. And also maybe from even just marching your way through the plants, which you will be doing when you're weeding. But even the visitors might be doing that. So I often love to defy the rules. As soon as I read, you have to do this in a book, I'm starting to get stubborn. And some of it, short plants in the front, taller in back, makes sense because how you're going to see the shorter plant in back. But if they're all very low, you can easily see over the taller ones. And often a garden has its own ideas about what it wants to be and will seed itself, or the birds will add some seeds, and suddenly it comes up differently and you may decide you like it. So this is a showy bleeding heart, which is an Asian plant, one of the showiest things in the spring, but completely disappeared from our gardens by this time of year, not even leaves. So you'd think there's an empty spot. Most people I talk to want a garden that looks great all year, or realistically, maybe it doesn't have to look wonderful in January and February, but the rest of the time. And so maybe writing down your ideas about what your goals are is good. So then you can check back and say, well, how well am I doing with this? It's always a work in progress, but it's nice to say, well, if I add some evergreens, then it can be more interesting in the winter. Or if it's a wildflower meadow, this is loosely a wildflower meadow. If you're identifying the plants, you'll notice there are daylilies, which are not native to North America. That large mass of pink might have planted itself, though, in the middle. This is Maine, and it's fireweed, which is considered native not only to Europe, but North America, in the area just below the tundra. And why is it called fireweed? Because it pops up in response to an excess of phosphorus in the soil, which happens from ashes from a fire. So the wonderful story about this spot is this is Bar Harbor, Maine. If anybody, sounds like a few people know the history, that a lot of that area burned in the 1940s. Where else has a lot of fireweed? London, England, not New London, Old London. Why? If you've been listening to your history and important anniversaries recently, all the fires from bombing in World War II. So again, the 40s generated these masses and masses of fireweed. There's a lot of...
What is the fireweed? The
What?
purple?
It's the pinky purple that's in the back, that's taller than the woman, and is just, a huge group of it. And that's partly because of the location, and because you see that in fields that somebody hasn't mowed or the cows haven't grazed down to the ground all over that region. They maybe started with that and said, okay, let's put some big groups of other things and then mow a narrow path between them so people can wander through. And that was a garden on a garden tour. This, from the angle I took the picture, could be either a meadow, although a lot of these are European and Asian things as well as native plants that you wander through, or it could be a very wide and very layered perennial border. And actually there's evergreens behind it, so it is a border. But from this spot, it looks like it could be the inspiration for a completely different kind of garden. And then you look here, and you have what? 1.5 feet between the street where the cars are running, no sidewalk, and the house itself. I think I might be afraid if I lived there. But this is Marblehead, so this is pretty close by, and there are a lot of little narrow streets in Marblehead because it's such an old town that you have very little room to garden. But I'm not going to accept that as an excuse, because look at what they managed to do. These are mostly annuals, so it's not a year-round garden, but from May until sometime around now, we haven't had a frost yet, there could be things in bloom. So very satisfying during the weather that you spend a lot of time outside. So zinnias, petunias, begonias, I recognize in that picture. And everybody in Marblehead seems to appreciate the tiny area they have. Maybe they're glad they don't have to weed much, but so many people have little gardens or window boxes if they don't even have that 6 inches of space. This could be considered a dooryard garden too. And a dooryard garden can mean a lot of things. As you visit the ironworks, it's an herb garden and was legally required in Massachusetts in the 17th century because how were you going to get treated for illnesses if you didn't have all these herbs growing around your house. So people were, for a while, required to actually do this as best they could and share with their neighbors. And now this is a loosely interpreted dooryard garden. It's a garden that grows tightly right around the house, so if you need it, you can run out the door, grab it, and run back in. But these are not all medicinal plants, or even, this is more of an ornamental garden, but built to look kind of like that. And that's in Newton. That's one I did, I don't know how many decades ago, though, quite a while. It could also be considered a modified rock garden, because part of the reason for the plant selection is that the soil was shallow, it's raised up on walls to cover the foundations, and the plants growing there all have to be able to take drought and not to have reach their roots down too deep. So we've got basket of gold in the front with the gray leaves tumbling over. The reddish in the back is actually the fall color, not the flower, but the seed heads of Sedum Autumn Joy.
Oh.
Yeah. And another few or two of that same garden. At the same time, people often tell me, but I love this and I love that, and I love ornamental grasses, and I want. Now, ornamental grasses, for the most part, do require sun. So this is on the sunny side of the house, and you can see the fountain grass trying to hide around the corner on the sunny side. Wildflower meadows, if you go to Garden in the Woods or the Native Plant Trust in Framingham, you'll see a lot of inspiration from the garden collections there. And while they're emphasizing New England native plants, they do have some that are, as long as it's native to North America, it counts. And so this is turkey beard, xerophyllum. So xerophyllum starts with an X. That first two syllables is a reminder that it's for dry areas. So great for rock gardens, for any places that you've got an excess of light and maybe can't reach the hose there very easily. You will need to water any plants, even a cactus, a couple times a week for the first year, not the winter, but the first growing season that you have it. But plants like this will be drought tolerant after that, and very little need to pay attention to it.
Wow.
Your goals might be based on other things, gardens that you've seen that inspired you, or historical time periods. There was a period of time, again, the ironworks was when glass was expensive. That's why all the little diamond pane windows. So people couldn't afford greenhouses. And gradually, in the early 19th century, it was considered a sign of your status, and certainly your money, if you could afford a greenhouse. So you would show off, or a conservatory, a more elegant greenhouse, yes, and you would grow annuals and show them off all around your garden. And many cities and towns did this too, recognizing that a lot of the residents couldn't afford it, by having a city greenhouse, and then they would do carpet bedding, as low annuals were called, in the city parks. If this looks, well, this is Pennsylvania, Longwood Gardens, which has many, many garden styles. But this is very similar to what the Boston Public Garden looked like at its heyday. It still looks that way a little bit, but if you look at turn-of-the-century gardens, there's paisley shapes. It looks like an oriental carpet, which is where the carpet bedding designation came in. So all the different colors, layers, plenty of maintenance. Nobody says they want high-maintenance gardens anymore, but I guess they did in those days. And the status that proved you couldn't have these plants if you didn't have your own greenhouse. Eventually it was, well, now you can buy it from a greenhouse. You can go to a nursery, and today you don't have to have your own if you don't want to. You can always go down the street. There's a couple of nurseries with greenhouses in Saugus, and others in surrounding towns. So you can find many, many things that you might want. Here's a combination of part shade plantings. Columbine, which will seed itself. It will have its own ideas about where it wants to grow, so it might not stay in the spot you put it. The bleeding heart, that we saw peeking through the fence in that first slide. Bulb gardens are often a category on their own or a portion of another garden. It might be a border, it might be the carpet bedding. If you go to the public garden in spring, full of tulips. I don't know if they stand guard all night, keeping the bunnies away. There are rabbit repellents, but most of us get defeated when we forgot it rained last night and we didn't replenish the peppers or the whatever we had chosen to spray on it. So tulips are food for a lot of different rabbits. Squirrels will eat them even. Voles will tunnel underneath. Crocuses are very tasty and edible too, while there are other bulbs that are poisonous or that just taste bad. Now the poisonous ones, they taste bad first. I've planted daffodils. Every book you ever will read say that daffodils in the foreground are not eaten by rabbits. My rabbits don't read the books. I put them out there for them, but they don't. I don't put them out. But I've found a bud of the daffodil every spring. There's one or two of them bitten off and then spit out right next to the plant. And then they've learned, so they won't go after that anymore. But the flowers don't taste good. So for every kind of gardening, there's a few things that you might need to know that go beyond what the tag says or what the label says on the plantings. Ornamental grasses first became popular in the Victorian era. Nobody planted them. This is not lawn grass. This is all the tall, colorful, interesting seed head grasses mixed in with perennials maybe, like the black-eyed Susan in the foreground here, or maybe other kinds of perennials. And then they went out of style. And then they came back into style in the 1980s due to European gardeners and one big firm in the Washington, D.C. area that was published in all the magazines. And that's how styles change, or one way that they do. This is more of a perennial border with a picket fence. But it's not viewed just from one side. It is viewed maybe from the house, from the front walk mostly. But people look over the fence all the time, like I obviously was doing. And then there are gardens that go under arbors or tunnels or pergolas, which are a little wider than an arbor but still have a kind of open roof overhead. And these are popular for a lot of different reasons. Maybe you wanted to grow climbing plants like these gourds, and they take up too much space sprawling along the ground. So vertical gardening has a lot of good reasons to do it. The annuals I mentioned before, cutting gardens are another category. The tricky thing about them is that once you've cut the flowers for your vases, what does the garden look like? A bunch of lopped off stems. It looks kind of like the rabbit had a party.
Even if you cut them before that, then they'll grow long.
Yes, most annuals will regrow. So it's not empty.
Depends on where you cut them.
It depends on where you cut them. If you're mixing perennials and annuals, you need to do a little research into whether these perennials will rebloom, because some will. Long stems and a beautiful cup-shaped flower sounds like it would be the ideal thing for your cutting garden. I'm talking about a daylily. What's the problem with that one? They close up at night. So as soon as you brought it into your kitchen table, the petals close up. It looks unattractive. The one time you can use it for your bouquets is if you have an outside party. On the picnic table, in the sun, it'll be just fine. So there's loads and loads of things that you kind of, experience may teach you in some ways, and sometimes if you read enough, you'll know before you get expensive mistakes. The shade garden staples when I was growing up were primarily hostas, and hostas, and hostas, and maybe ferns, and then some more hostas, because there's so many different kinds of hostas and more being developed every year. The result is there's loads of people who know only hostas, but maybe not how to pronounce them or what their name is, and other people who say, I hate hostas, because they were so common. The Boston Flower Show once had a display that was all hostas. because Alan Haskell wanted to show the variety. Big ones, they're known for having big, bold foliage, but there's tiny ones as well that can grow in a little tiny pot. Yeah, yeah. So you could have texture contrasts. We're back to sun for some reason, and an herb garden. And herb gardens, many people grow them primarily because they want to eat the herbs, and also because there's not very much that's going to eat them. Many mint family members and anything with a strongly scented leaf is not beloved by the bunnies, the deer, many kinds of wildlife are not going to be interested. And yet these scents are generally not repulsive to people who eat them. So herb gardens are very old-fashioned too, so sometimes people want to grow them because they have a Victorian or a 17th century or other colonial house, and it seems appropriate because it fits the architecture. Other people want it because they are great cooks, and they want to be able to go out and pick their tomatoes from the vegetable garden and pick their other oregano, their own oregano varieties, their chives, yeah, loads of things. And yep, obviously a bunch of people have their own favorite plants. And they can be arranged like a wildflower meadow with a few paths in between them, or even though very few of these things that we've all mentioned are native to North America, they're beloved plants that European settlers brought with them. But if you've ever tried to grow mint in with your other herbs, you know there's a problem. And that is that the mint wants to take over. It prefers shade, and you'll actually slow it down a bit if you put it in the sun with all these other plants, but maybe not enough to keep it from overrunning everything else. So the walkways and things that might be divided. If you look up in the dictionary what's an herb, there's a lot of different definitions. It can be a non-woody plant. So pretty much anything that's not a tree or a shrub is an herb. But that's not usually what people think of when they say, I want to start an herb garden. Another definition is an aromatic plant. So this means any plant that has fragrant leaves, flowers, doesn't necessarily have to be edible. Lavender we think of as scenting things, but lavender is edible. So lavender lemon ice cream became popular. One of my students made lavender lemon muffins for the last day of class a few years ago. These are geraniums, and you say, no, they're not. And I say, yes, they are. This is the perennial geranium, which people sometimes call cranesbill, but it's the one that got left with the scientific name of geranium when what all of us think of as a geranium became named pelargonium. We're not going to argue about the leaves, though. The leaves of both of them have a scent that everybody will recognize, even if it's hard to describe. That's another perennial geranium right there. So if you pinch the leaf, you would find that same scent that you smell with the red or orange or pink or white flowers for the window boxes. A large group of plants belonging to alliums are grown either for food or for decorative purposes. Ornamental alliums were very popular around the turn of the 19th to 20th century. Then they kind of went out of style. Then they came back in. Right now they seem to be enjoying another resurgence, partly due to not this one, but another one that's a native plant that has a smaller cluster of flowers and blooms in the fall. But they're very versatile because they bloom at different times. A lot of people are disturbed by the cold winters and want a way to garden year-round. So how do people in cold climates figure out how to do that? This is what's known as a Wardian case. If you don't see those a lot in garden magazines now, they were popular in the 18th and 19th century. You'd have it indoors on your counter because there were no televisions back then. So what did you do? You sat back and you watched your plants grow. Maybe you'd have fish in a little pool area too. You don't think that was as exciting? Well, I don't know. I kind of like it. This one, here's one that has fish in it. So this is a very elaborate one. You'd have to have money and time to maintain this. And the ferns and things growing up above it, have a different requirement. And there's a little waterfall coming over the rocks. So maybe there really is a lot going on here, quite a bit, more than most soap operas happening. And then the carved fish and frog in the front kind of makes the architecture tie in. A lot of plants that people would need a greenhouse for can be grown on a windowsill. You can't grow big specimens, but certainly someone here has complained that my windowsills are completely loaded up with plants on every windowsill. You can't open the windows. You can't do anything about the shades. And I admit that's a bit of a problem. One thing we can do now is there are grow lights. So there's electric lighting can solve some of the age-old problems. As an architectural feature, those windows or partial greenhouses could be very effective and ornamental as part of the house, and not just, well, you've got to do this if you want the plants to survive. That might be New York or Pennsylvania. I forget if it's Philadelphia or in the Bronx, but one of the big botanical gardens. They often have greenhouses with multiple rooms. So there's going to be a tropical house, a cactus house, a cool, so more like what we would see in the summer around here, but that requires some cool temperatures. You'd find things like that. So each room has a different emphasis, and maybe even gets decorated for seasonal things. Montgomery Place, that is Pennsylvania, but I'm not sure exactly where. And these are the ones you could buy in a 19th century catalog. So, you don't have to build them from scratch. You could just order it. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'm sure. Some popular plants, often people would grow things that didn't require a cold period in the winter, or they might just wheel them out of the greenhouse for a period of time when it's a little cooler, like now, wheel them back in when the temperatures freeze. Or they might wheel them out in the summer because all that glass heats up the environment inside, just like you might move things away from the window if for certain plants it's too bright. This is string of pearls, which is still a popular houseplant, draping down. And this is a bit more elaborate than I have in my dining room window. You notice the lady relaxing there, either writing out her correspondence or reading a good book under the parasol because it's so bright and warm in that Victorian greenhouse. Little plants in the garden. I whine continuously about missing the flower show since 2020, and all the little displays. There was a window section, a window box and window indoor plant section that would inspire you as all the different things you could grow. And very often close by, you'd have a potting shed or maybe a little potting closet or a room where you'd keep all your equipment, have a sink for cleaning up. And this is actually the office area or the work area in the oldest greenhouse in Massachusetts, the Lyman Estates in Waltham. Every February, they have a camellia show because that's the month that camellias bloom in the greenhouse. But other times of the year, there's many other plants blooming too, so it's definitely worthwhile. This is a garden in New Jersey. I forget what the greenhouse was, but this is both a greenhouse garden and an herb garden. If you look at a lot of what's growing above that wall is about 4 inches high. There's a concrete floor underneath, so it's shallow planting areas, but they're well attended and watered, and so they don't dry out. There's a few plants, like growing in that section of terracotta pipe in the front, you might recognize an aloe that needs the warm temperatures. But there's a lot of herbs in that garden that you could grow outside in our climate. It's partly looking at design. When you're thinking about an herb garden, they're generally not full of showy flowers. So how do you make it interesting? different colors and textures of foliage is one way to make it visually interesting. And that garden does it very well. Here's carpet bedding just with one species, petunias, which might be started in the greenhouse and moved outside. So here's a greenhouse room or a lean-to greenhouse that attaches to the house. When you're figuring out, oh, that costs too much, bear in mind that it kind of stops some of the heat leaking out of the house too, to have that warm area. I haven't done the figures to say if this is really just my excuse why I think it's a good idea, or whether it's practical. Here's a taller, plants tall enough that you couldn't fit them in your regular living room, but just outside the kitchen door. These are not my house. And some of you know that this was just an excuse to show a picture of a cat. But that is the Lyman greenhouses too. And they have, why do they have cats in the greenhouse? They're workers. Right, yeah. They control the mice who would otherwise be eating the seeds and tunneling through. So, a very important worker. Back to another year's flower show with window gardens. This is a flower show too, although it looks like it's outdoors. Again, carpet bedding with bulbs. The tulips might be eaten by the increase in rabbits we've experienced, but the grape hyacinths are somewhat rabbit resistant. They're the little purple ones down below. Annuals, a mixture of things. There are new annuals coming out every year. One of the nice things about most of my customers say I don't want annuals because I don't want to have to replant every year, which you would. But there are a few that say, well, but every year I might have an urge to do a different color scheme. So this is one way I can get away with it. And because they grow fast, they're fairly inexpensive. So it's kind of like, well, if you make fancy desserts, you're going to have eaten it in just a few days. With the annual beds, you'll have them all summer and can take lots of pictures of them to remember, well, that year I was into this particular reddish-orange color, and then the year after it was purple, and then I just couldn't get enough of the apricot. Yeah.
What are those, what are those little red
The little
things in the back?
Oh, that is gomphrena, Gomprena. It probably has a common name, but gomphrena is how I remember it, and zinnias in multicolors in the front. They're pretty drought-tolerant sun lovers. It is harder to have a shade garden that's all annuals. Not impossible, but this is sun again. This is Mohonk Mountain House in New York. And that is too, yeah. And this is not New England. One of my students gave me this picture. I didn't go there. Some of you might recognize it. It's in France. It was originally, when the castle was built, a vegetable garden. So part of the kitchen gardens, very practical, with hedges of boxwood all the way around it. Boxwood is evergreen, so first of all, in the winter you have a pattern when the vegetables are gone. In this case, it's now just ornamental. Looks like zinnias and marigolds mostly at this point. But the boxwood keeps some winter interest, so if you created a pattern, a geometric pattern maybe, or something more free-form in modern times, it would still have some winter interest. And boxwood is especially useful because who doesn't find it appetizing? Nobody finds it appetizing. The foliage has an aroma that I'm told smells like a litter box that you never changed. And my own theory is that, so the rabbits and the deer all think, whoa, big bobcats have been over in this yard. That's the only explanation for that smell. So let's clear out and not even look to see if it's edible, because we'll be caught. That's Waltham, might be the Lyman Estates, might be another estate down there, and again in the summer. They are more photogenic when the annuals are in there, but even in the winter there's some framework to the garden and some interest. And how much can you expect in January and February if you're practical about its being New England? Shade gardens Do you just give up? Well, there's a few things to think about besides looking on the plant tag about whether it says sun or shade. This is a would-be shade garden, I guess. It's all pine trees. How much is blooming under there? None. Why? Because white pines form their own mulch. You don't really need to weed it because the pine straw that drops abundantly keeps almost all the plants down. So you'll be frustrated if you try to plant things unless you rake it away. But if you say, I just want low maintenance, I don't want to have to plant ground cover or grass under here, then you can be happy because it will do it itself. One of the few perennials, and this is a native one, is sometimes called false lily of the valley or Canada Mayflower. And this will grow in pine. It will force its way up. It's drought tolerant once it gets established, and it frequently comes in on its own. I just walked into the edge of Lynn Woods and took a picture of this, not in May, not this month. Shade, consider whether the shade comes from buildings, as it would in downtown Boston. Many of the garden tours in Boston, the gardens are shady because their neighbors are 6 stories or more tall. So there's not much light that comes in between. A half hour at noon, that's about all you can get some places. So there's plenty of hostas, plenty of heuchera, also known as coral bells, in that garden, and they take advantage of the different foliage colors. You also need to have a lot of light and bright colors. So here's the hosta garden again. Besides the fact that hosta will grow in shade if the rabbits and deer haven't eaten it already, is that there's white edges or white centers to a lot of the leaves, white flowers on some varieties, and that contrasts with a shadowy area. Almost always, if you plant your favorite things in a shady garden and you stand back and look, you say, well, I'm not satisfied. Nothing's really standing out. I planted red flowering things and they look lost in the shadow. Pastels and whites, that's what stands out the most. Dappled sunlight doesn't really show much of anything else. This is a bluish leaf of a rounded hosta and white flowers. Bold foliage. It's easy to find big leaves in the shade because they're not losing too much from evaporation. There are only a handful of things that bloom in the sun that are going to have big leaves. Doesn't mean there aren't small leaf things too. This is European ginger, which is evergreen. So it's a good choice if you're noticing your shade garden isn't getting enough winter. Nothing's going on in the winter. And a plant that's been available for a long time, but who goes to the garden center in February? They're not ready to think about it yet. And February is when these bloom. This is Lenten rose. Well, some years they don't bloom till March or April, but they bloom before Easter is, at least in Europe where they grew. And sometimes they bloom as early as December, and some in our climate. And some years the temperatures have gone up and down and they look like they've been killed by freezing temperatures. They did in 2023, and then they popped back up and bloomed in May, which was a first for me. Ferns, mosses, and shade ground covers. And a little reflecting pool. If there's a glimmer of light coming between the branches of the trees above, that's often a great way to add some reflection and interest to a shade garden. White bleeding hearts and white Solomon seal. This could be an all-white garden, but it's also a very effective, simple combination for a small shade garden because it will reflect plenty of light back. And that was the corner of my previous house. And some echoing of shapes with those arching stems. Sanguinaria, bloodroot. It sounds like it would be all red. The roots are red. But what you see are the white flowers early in the spring. This is one of the first native things to come up. And Dutchman's breeches. Not a native of Holland. North American plant, but that's what the flower shape reminded people of. And trillium, and a lot of these plants, actually the foliage dies away by summer. In the shade, that is something you have to be a little careful of in your plant selection. Because in the woods, the forest canopy closes over and there's no sunlight coming up. gets to be, so it's useless to produce leaves that might just dry up and they're not doing any photosynthesis. So you're paying the workers and they're not working. So there's a lot of plants that are called spring ephemerals, which means temporary. They bloom in the spring and that's it. If they evolved in a deciduous forest, that's almost always what they are. But there's a handful of things. The Virginia bluebell leaves are all gone. Lungwort, that looks a lot like it, keeps its leaves all summer. So you might choose, I'm not saying never plant Virginia bluebell, but that you might consider, well, we're going to put a few clumps of something that's going to be effective later in the summer, so when we're sitting in the shade of the tree, we can enjoy it. Some shade gardens were not planted intentionally. Ants planted this one. Ants will take the seeds to feed to their hatching eggs, but there's a little fatty sac on the eggs of on the seeds, of each of the violets. So they've made a complete violet lawn in this house I lived next door to in Amherst decades ago. Woodland phlox. This is not a common one. Nurseries carry it, but it's not the kinds of phlox that most people think of. A wonderful woodland plant. It does keep its leaves later, but the flowers are short, just a spring season one. So often for a shade garden, you have to plan carefully to make sure there's summer interest, whereas just filling your cart with your favorite things for the sun, you might end up accidentally just having lots going on. Mosses can fill in. I get asked all the time, how do I get rid of moss in my lawn? And yeah, why? When I'm being polite. And other times I'm saying, like, why don't you just get rid of the lawn and the moss? You'd be much happier. It'd be green more of the year. You won't have to mow it. There's 1,000 reasons that this could be better. You could design a Japanese garden. Ferns. Again, most of them are not colorful, but the textures are wonderful, so they're great things to include. If your garden has a bare spot because something died or you trimmed it back, pots are a wonderful thing to move around. You don't want to, this pot was one I moved around the shade garden all the time when I thought it needed a focal point. If the spring ephemerals were gone, I plunked down the pot with the ferns. If bulbs were about to come up in the spring, I'd move the pot and plant something else out there. Daffodils are also more shade tolerant, although not deep shade, but they will take more shade than tulips. This is a shade garden under beech trees in New London, Connecticut, which looked like a lawn all year, except in the spring. In April, they'd be in full bloom. In June, they'd look like a kind of unkempt lawn because they had to leave the foliage to nourish the bulbs. But, I don't mind that. If you see my lawn, you know I don't. And for a while, we couldn't grow lilies because of the lily beetle. Its life cycle has kind of come and gone. Not that there aren't any, but they're not just eating up every lily in the garden anymore. And golden alexanders, another wonderful native plant that many people are not familiar with for shade. Again, back to hostas, which are a good old standby, or false Solomon seal. Different flower, not closely related, but a very low maintenance plant, and little reddish fruits that are decorative. So those are a few things that...
Did you say?
No, decorative.
Oh.
Sorry, yeah, it means a different thing. So I have to carefully speak, I guess. Semicifuga, now called Actea, which if you ate enough of it, it might be dangerous. I remember my science teacher saying, well, everything's dangerous if you have too much of it. Too much water will kill you. I never really did figure out whether he meant you'd drown or whether drinking too much water could be a problem too. But, it's the dosage. Anything medicinal, whether it's believed to be medicinal now or years ago, like you might have in your garden, you don't want to experiment with it. But most of the medicinal plants are poisonous in the wrong dosage. So this is another bleeding heart. This one will bloom all summer. I had a client complain it bloomed May, June, July, August, September. Finally, it stopped in October. So stay away from this if that's a problem. The other bleeding heart, the showy one that looks better in all the pictures, will have finished flowering by June and will be yellow by July and will be gone most falls. Columbine, bright red. How could you miss that in the garden? Well, if it's in the shade where it normally grows, cardinal flower blends into the green. So it's only when the sunlight hits it. And but very striking, one of our most showy native wildflowers. So if anybody says, and hummingbirds love them, yes. There's two plants in my garden that I keep an eye on in the summer when they bloom because of the hummingbirds. One is the cardinal flower and the other one is bee balm, which comes in many colors. The red attracts them instantly because birds can see color very well, but they will also go to other tubular flowers. And so pink, bee balm, if red is just not your thing. Columbine they'll go to, yeah. The columbine blooms a bit earlier, and I don't usually find a lot of hummingbirds to be in this area until July and August. But once in a while, they'll go to lilacs too, because the bees can't easily get all the nectar from the deep trumpet end of the flower. Water gardens. I'm going to have to talk a little faster, I guess. But so you want to have a water garden. They're expensive. They're time-consuming because in this climate you usually have to drain them well before winter sets in, or they'll freeze and they'll crack, and then there'll be repairs to do. A couple things to think of. Many people like fountains, which are very effective, dramatic, active. A recirculating pump will help you conserve water. If it just drains away, that is going to be very expensive. But the other thing is that a fountain like this, it's very hard to grow plants in because many plants will be drowned and splashed by it. If it's a floating plant, like water hyacinth, that its roots are just in the water and it drifts around, well, it'll be bobbing up and down more than it can stand. If it is, well, here's a water garden, right? It's a swimming pool. Full of chlorine, so no flowers are going to grow, no plants are going to grow in it. But it looks like a water garden in a way because of all the flowers right around the edge. There are ways to get to the pool. I just didn't take any pictures of them. Now this one doesn't have chlorine in it, so there are water lilies and there are the irises that people warn you against now because these are invasive. So used to be a standard flag iris. The purple ones are still allowed, but the yellow ones are not. And so they're growing in pots at the edge. They're what's considered a marginal aquatic, or a plant that grows at the edge of most ponds. The lilies, with their floating leaves, are submerged aquatics. Their roots are in the soil or mud at the bottom of the pond. The pond has to be a certain depth. If it's over 5 feet, they might not be able to reach the top. They struggle too much and they won't survive. If it's too much under 5 feet, the water will freeze even if you try to drain it, and the bulbs will die because of cold. If it's right about 5 feet, perfect. You can probably keep the plants alive, as many gardens in New England do, and have them come back year after year. But then there are also tropical water lilies that you just have to bring indoors or replant. This is what they look like in the fall. The flowers are done. The leaves will eventually sink to the ground, sink to the bottom of the pond. This one's getting so covered up that you can't tell there's water there, or soon won't be able to. I saw someone on a garden tour actually try to take a shortcut. This is not this one. This was no one I knew. So he tried to take a shortcut to his wife on a garden path, and there was a big splash because what he thought was ground cover, and he was just going to walk right over it, was in fact a shallow pool. So probably never did that again. These are native water lilies. These are Indian lotus, which you can only grow in the summer around here. But there was a water lily garden nursery on the South Shore for many years, and this was part of their display garden. Water hyacinths. That's another one restricted now, because if your garden is right near a pond and there's some outflow, this will start crowding out other species. In Florida, it's a big problem because the temperatures are warm. Here, in the winter, it's usually killed back, so it's not as big an issue. But with the winters getting a bit warmer, it's still a worry, so Massachusetts gardeners can't use it. Water hyacinth, because of the look of the flower. It's not really related to hyacinths. If you've got an indoor pool,
My water hyacinth, I've noticed that they're not blooming this year at all.
oh,
Usually it's when the nights are cold and
Yeah.
and the days are still warm. That's when they start.
that's when they come out, yeah.
Doing anything.
Interesting, yeah. We used to have them at Northeast Nursery where I work in the little outdoor pond that we keep to entertain the kids whose parents are boring them to death while they go through the nursery. We didn't have any this year, but I'm not sure if that's because we don't sell water plants and we would have had to keep them alive or buy new ones every winter and aren't really bothering so much. The marginal aquatics that can winter over keep coming back because there's no work to maintaining them. But, so it must be something to do with the weather. I wouldn't say drought as long as the pond hasn't dried up, even though that was a problem
No,
with
they
some
have a
plants.
problem with it, and just I noticed this year, they
Huh.
haven't, in the past, the plant themselves have gotten pretty, big, relatively
Yeah.
speaking. They're all staying small now, and they're just not doing anything. And the water now is below 50.
Yeah.
So I don't believe they're gonna do anything.
No, probably not. Nutrients might be an issue. I hadn't heard that, but just kind of a guess of what could be causing them not to flower. And the big problem with fertilizing water plants, though, is if you've got fish, too. The phosphates that stimulate flower bud production is toxic to most fish. So how do you do it so that your plants flower but you don't kill the fish? Not an easy question to answer. What's this? This is a bed restraining the marginal plants from growing out and filling the pond up completely. You sometimes see pond gardens where you can't tell they were a pond anymore because the water lilies or the cattails at the edges or the irises have just grown and spread. So they do need to be cut back, or what you might be able to determine there is that there's a little wall of cedar. So cedar trees were cut down, fastened together. That's kind of a container at the edge of the pond. When the plants are growing up, it looks like a natural pond edge. You'd have to probably be in the pond paddling around to say, wait a minute, what's going on there? That's how they're controlling all the plants in that garden. There it is, again, ready to be planted. Nothing's planted in it yet, as far as I can tell. And here's a sample of what you might use along the pond edge. And those are natives. There's quite a few of those in the Saugus River, as you will also find skunk cabbage at the edge of the river. One of the first bright green things. So despite the aroma that isn't what everybody wants, they are nice plants, I would say, for appreciating in the spring. And then marsh marigolds, not related to marigolds, but they're golden. They do grow in marshes, so the common name isn't completely misleading. And that's another native plant. The little pink in the front is a European primrose, not quite open. So those are a few of the things that people might want to start a water garden in order to grow. You need to think about how deep the water should be, not too deep, not too shallow, in order to grow those plants. Pickerelweed, there's a lot of that at Pierce Pond and Silver Lake in Breakart. So that is a fairly common native plant. What used to be popular but now is being highly discouraged is purple loosestrife. When I was in high school, you'd drive up 95 and fields of purple loosestrife would be in bloom. None of it native, none of it much use to wildlife. I won't say no use because there's still some pollen, still some nectar in it, but many insects couldn't lay their eggs in it, so you don't want it taking over everything. So you can't buy it in nurseries anymore. Rock gardens, well, usually the reason people plant a rock garden is they've got a big rock in their backyard. This is Beverly, I want to say, or Manchester maybe. Some years ago, this woman was famous for her rock gardens, and this was a garden tour. That's why there's so many people out there. Can you imagine having to hold on to the rocks and climb with your trowel in hand, planting in the crevices between the rocks, like that little basket of gold way up 3 times people's height, 18 feet up there in the air, and some more of that ledge and outcrop. A lot of eastern Massachusetts does have ledge. So if you are a determined gardener, you might find you've got to look for those little crevices. Dwarf Alberta spruce. So yes, you can grow trees in a rock garden. Some mosses, that's a rock and water garden all at once. Rock garden plants also grow in troughs. This is not my mother's, but she planted the hens and chickens in the bird bath one year. I don't remember why. They did just fine. When it rained, the whole thing would fill up with rain. We never dumped it out. Then you'd think it would kill them, but it evaporated away, and then they'd be without water for maybe 2 weeks, and they could survive with that. With no soil, except when the leaves decayed, there'll be a little bit of soil created. Different kinds of lichen and hens and chickens on the ledge. This is more rock garden than it looks like. We're looking down from the second floor of a house, a garden I designed in Rockport some years ago, and the little rocks sticking out all had to be put there because they came up when they dug the foundation of the house. Didn't want to carry those heavy things away. So it really is pretty much just rocks, a little bit of soil thrown on the top, and so shallow is what all these plants got. There's basket of gold, which is not in bloom. There's Iberis or evergreen candy tuft, and there's lots of sedum in that picture. Must be early summer, looking at what's in bloom. Swimming pools you think of as a water garden because there's lots of water, but if you are actually not planting in the pool, and it is a swimming pool, the plant life is more like a rock garden. It's very dry, hot, sunny. You've got pavement of some kind, stepping stones like this garden. The garden's not very wide. The pool is always going to be out in the hot sun because nobody wants a cold swimming pool or one that fills up with leaves too fast. So you've got to think rock garden when you plant what's around the pool. That's the basket of gold I've been talking about. If I were to award what's the best, most interesting plant in February, this would be it, but not from what you can see in this picture. It's got yellow flowers in April and May, but gray foliage that doesn't look matted, crushed, wilted, or anything in February. And, a good contrast. You say, well, it's not green, but it's alive in the winter, and a good contrast to needle evergreens that you might plant near it. I was late to a christening because I saw this garden on my way there, and I had to get out and take a bunch of pictures before I went on my way. They planted on top of the wall. The seeds fell to the bottom of the wall. The little cracks between the asphalt pavement of the sidewalk. So this is little itty-bitty places where you'd say, how could I possibly plant there? And yet you've got that dust ruffle underneath the stone. So 3 houses down, they had the same thing.
Even if you didn't.
Yeah. Corydalus. Golden corydalus is that yellow plant. One of the few things, what's really tough in a rock garden is if you have shade. There's nothing that grows in the shade. Most rock garden plants evolved on mountaintops where it's hot and the trees can't grow, so there's no shade up there. But there's a few things that grow on rocky cliff faces in the forest, and this is one thing like that. So ferns sometimes, rock phlox can take sun or shade. That's the pink on the far right. This is the sunny end of that same wall. with basket of gold. And that's the hens and chickens mostly in there. But the Iberis or perennial candy tuft is the white flower.
Those are hens and chickens, those tiny little things?
Those little round things. There's a lot of kinds of hens and chickens. There are hens and chickens collectors, just like there are hosta collectors. But yeah, there's one up in Vermont who has a nursery based primarily on that. Between steps, some of the creative rock gardens include patios and walkways. This is Long Hill in Beverly. So that's leading up to the mansion. This is somewhere in Pennsylvania I was, but I don't remember. It might have been Longwood Gardens, because there's so many gardens there. Oh, I should recognize the sign. I think that's Garden in the Woods. This is a rock garden area. And my mother's cat, Cinnamon, and rock phlox. That's the first thing most people plant if they're planting a rock garden, because it's so versatile and can grow in extremely shallow soil. And there's some of the bigger hens and chickens. So why would you collect them? Because some of them are maybe half an inch around at maturity, and some of them are going to be 6 or 7 inches. Lots of variation. That's hens and chickens, the white between the stones, and creeping thyme blooming above it, hens and chickens in flower. These people didn't have a rock garden, so they built it. This is at the top of a stone wall. And they were collectors of rock garden plants. So whether the landscape called for it or not, they had to have a rock garden. Poppies, Iceland poppies, winter look for that same garden top, and creeping thyme between the stepping stones. For some rock gardens, the only way to plant this is from seed, because you buy a pot in the nursery and the stones are not going to be separated enough for you to be able to wedge the roots in. So sprinkling the seed between the stones. This is also a garden, private garden on the North Shore. And even some of the tiny daffodils can be bulbs pushed in between the stones. Lewisia, named for Lewis and Clark's expedition. That's a western native. Wonderful rock garden plant, blooms in the spring. And most prickly pears are not native, but this one's native to Cape Cod. So a real Massachusetts wildflower. It is out in Provincetown. There is actually a conservation area dedicated to them. So right outside the town of Provincetown, there's some hills, and prickly pear grows all over the place. Cold frames help to extend your season. Not used nearly as much as they used to be. It's easier to go buy a plant in a nursery than to have your own cold frame. But you can build your own. If you've got a leftover window, that's what a lot of people do. Dig a trench in the ground. The ground protects the plants through much of the winter, and that window pane insulates from the cold temperature. So you might not be able to grow a palm tree through a Saugus winter, but you could certainly extend your vegetable garden another month or two, or start things earlier. And it used to be much more popular. I think a lot of these pictures are from 19th century garden catalogs. And a forcing house, another word for it. This was a little bit deeper version of a cold frame. You could walk down steps into it. And cloches, I have a few of those. If I'm thinking there might be a frost and then we'll have 2 more weeks when it doesn't freeze, I'll just plop something over it. So there are glass ones like this, and then there's the cheap version, the 2-liter soda bottle that you cut the bottom off of. That's why the hyacinth can bloom in the snow. Okay. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about butterfly gardens, because they're one of the biggest type of gardens, or pollinator gardens, which extends it to not just the butterflies, maybe not just helping the monarchs, but part of the reason that we emphasize butterflies is that there are certain plants that they need in order to lay their eggs. The eggs will not hatch, and the caterpillars survive if they don't have this specific kind of plant. With monarchs, it's milkweeds and plants in the same genus as milkweeds. Asters, there's a whole other set of butterflies that need those. Adult butterflies can get nectar from a wide range of things. They don't have to be native, but it's mostly native plants, not this particular lily though, that will support the egg laying. So it's worth doing a little bit of research. There's bee balm that I mentioned. The hummingbirds will flock to that. If there's one within miles, it will find that red flower. I don't know if you can see the camouflaged butterfly there, viceroy maybe, or painted lady, not a monarch. In the cone flowers, we've got a lot of aster family members, and they love that. The most important thing, I think, to keep the butterflies around through their life cycle is something blooming spring through fall. So it's going to be a variety of things, not just one kind of plant. Yeah, there's a better picture of that butterfly. You can see it. There's a monarch on butterfly bush. Back.
With the coneflowers?
Yeah,
Right now, they're dead.
yeah.
Would you cut them back or just leave them?
Well, I leave them right now because if there's any seeds on them, the birds will eat the seeds.
Okay.
And then in the early spring, I might cut them back. Yeah, yeah. Butterfly bush gets a lot of maligning, but that's what draws the butterflies for nectar. They can't, most of them can't lay their eggs in it, but it is one way of getting them to come to your garden. That's what I always see the monarchs in first in my yard, and then I see them as a last resort going over to the milkweeds that I planted just for them. And this is one of those milkweeds. It's called butterfly weed. Even common milkweed that as late as 10 years ago, no nursery could possibly expect to be paid money for. Now you're finding, yep, that's inexpensive, but it is out there, and Girl Scout troops are planting it to try to make sure that there's enough habitat for the butterflies. Asters draw an awful lot of pollinators. Butterflies like we saw in the aster family, but also many kinds of bumblebees, hoverflies, which don't sound too attractive, but they are important pollinators. And so at this time of year, if I don't have a lot of customers at the nursery, I'll go out and look at the asters and see what's buzzing and humming around those. And that's, I believe, the last slide. So I'll take any questions that people have.
And one question, is, I like to get like different kinds of plants around the pond,
Yeah,
but sometimes like I see them, but I don't know where to buy them. I go to the nurseries or Home Depot or whatever, and I can find some interesting plants, but some of the things I really want, I don't know where to get them.
and yeah, I don't have an easy answer anymore. 15 years or so ago, there were a number of places that had water garden displays and that had a good place to grow the plants. Northeast Nursery did. They had an expert on water gardens who retired, and then they don't do it so much anymore. But the closest place, I think, is Country Gardens in Rowley.
Yeah, that's what
I also mentioned a place in Whitman, Mass. that doesn't exist anymore, but that had a huge display garden. They sold only water plants, but that's long gone. Part of the reason that it's difficult to find a place is that the care for them in the nursery, while they're waiting for somebody to come along and want to buy them, is much different, more complicated, not easy to do in a period of drought, although nurseries are generally exempted from drought restrictions that a lot of towns around here have had the last few years. Sometimes you can get the mail order, but again, you can picture that a plant that is evolved to grow in wet spots isn't going to be able to be shipped for very, very easily. And even if they do go through the mail, you better open them right away and not leave them until you have more time and get around to it. In average garden soils, a lot of things can be sent bare root, which is lightweight, easy, and you soak them a little. But water garden plants, very few of them will tolerate that. So what you need are local places that specialize in it, and I think it's partly because water gardens are seen as high maintenance, and who wants high maintenance? No. Next question.
A few years ago, I have a little pond in my backyard, and I wanted some water. I wanted to plant. Home Depot, the catalog, I got some there. I don't know whether they still do it. Which is.
I'm not sure myself. Speaking of wanting water, maybe I better quit. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Oh, and are you going to encourage people to go across the street?
Yes, I
We probably
am.
should.
As you may know, the,
I can't turn around.
across the street at the town hall is the candidates' night, and the selectmen are over there, just starting. Some of us are gonna walk across the street. But I wanted to give you a couple of dates. November 17th is our a meeting with Beyond Plastics. We're partnering with SAVE. We were going to share the cost of it, but instead they asked if we could bring some cookies. I said, surely we can wrap up some cookies, and it's right here in this room. And it's at 6:30, Beyond Plastics, November 17th. The next one is our Thanksgiving Centerpiece Workshop, which is November 22nd at St. John's at 1 in the afternoon on a Saturday. That's a sign up, please. And then our wreath decorating would be December the 3rd. But Janice Long, who's sitting in the back, is the lady who sends out all of our reminders. And she's already sent all of these dates, but as dates get closer, she'll send those. Wreaths Across America is December 13th at Riverside. And our holiday luncheon is at Kowloon on December the 10th. At 1 o'clock, and that is a sign up also. And thank you to Randy for doing that.
Thank you for Nancy.
Thank you for Nancy for suggesting it, and thank you to Paul for doing all the work behind the scenes, getting this ready for us. And if we could pack our chairs up over here, we have to leave the room as we found it, and then we can go along. Thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate it.